Deep in the Sudanese desert lies a secret that rewrites everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt. A forgotten empire. Black pharaohs who ruled the entire Nile. Thousands of pyramids buried beneath the sand. Why has this kingdom been erased from history? The truth is finally coming to light. If you're tired of the same old history lessons that leave out incredible civilizations, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're about to uncover truths that have been buried for centuries. And stick around until the end. What we reveal in the final minutes will change everything you thought you knew about the pyramids. Picture this: the scorching desert of Sudan. Sand dunes stretching endlessly under a relentless sun. But rising from this barren landscape, something impossible appears. Pyramids. Not just one or two, but hundreds of them. Sharp, steep, pointing toward the sky like ancient fingers reaching for the heavens. These aren't the famous pyramids everyone learns about in school. These belong to a civilization that has been deliberately forgotten. A kingdom so powerful it once ruled all of Egypt. So advanced, it mastered technologies that amazed even the Romans. So wealthy, its gold mines funded empires. Yet somehow, this story has been buried deeper than the sand that covers these ruins. The question isn't just what happened to this civilization. The real question is, why has it been hidden from us? Here's something that will blow your mind. Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt. Yes, you heard that right. While Egypt has around 138 pyramids, Sudan has more than 250. Let that sink in for a moment. The country with the most pyramids in the world isn't the one we've been taught about our entire lives. These pyramids rise from three main sites scattered along the Nile River. Meroe, the crown jewel, sits about 200 kilometers north of Khartoum. Here, more than 200 pyramids cluster together in the desert, their distinctive steep sides creating shadows that shift with the sun. Then there's Nuri, where the tombs of ancient kings rest beneath structures that have weathered thousands of years. And El Kuru, where the oldest royal pyramids stand as silent witnesses to a dynasty that changed history. But here's where it gets interesting. These aren't miniature copies of Egyptian pyramids. They're unique, steeper, sharper, built with a distinctive style that shows a civilization with its own vision, its own engineering, its own story to tell. The entrances aren't on the sides like Egyptian pyramids. They're from the east, aligned with the rising sun, with small chapel structures attached where priests once performed sacred rituals. So why haven't most people heard about them? Why aren't they famous? Why don't they appear in textbooks next to the Great Pyramid of Giza? The answer to that question leads us down a rabbit hole of deliberate erasure, colonial prejudice, and a systematic attempt to rewrite history. These pyramids belong to the Kingdom of Kush, also known as Nubia. This wasn't some small territory or minor player in ancient history. This was a superpower. The Kushite civilization emerged around 3,000 years before the Common Era, right alongside ancient Egypt. For over 3,000 years, this kingdom thrived along the Nile, sometimes as Egypt's rival, sometimes as its trading partner, and for one glorious century as its ruler. Kush sat directly south of Egypt, in what is now modern Sudan. The Nile River flowed through both kingdoms, creating a natural highway for trade, culture, and sometimes war. While Egypt gets all the attention, Kush controlled something even more valuable: the trade routes to Inner Africa. Gold, ivory, ebony, incense, exotic animals, precious stones, all of these treasures flowed through Kushite territory. They weren't just middlemen either. The Kushites mined their own gold, So much of it that Egyptian pharaohs launched military campaigns just to control these mines. But gold wasn't their only resource. The Kushites mastered iron production at a time when iron was the cutting-edge technology of the ancient world. Their furnaces burned so hot, their techniques so advanced, that some historians call Meroe the Birmingham of ancient Africa. They produced iron tools, weapons, and goods on an industrial scale, trading them across the known world. The relationship between Kush and Egypt was complicated, like two siblings who couldn't decide whether to fight or cooperate. Sometimes they were allies, with Egyptian pharaohs marrying Kushite princesses to seal diplomatic bonds. Other times they were enemies, with armies clashing over territory and resources. Egyptian art shows Kushite warriors, their skin painted dark, their features distinctly African, sometimes as respected allies, sometimes as conquered enemies. But the Kushites absorbed Egyptian culture like a sponge. They worshipped Egyptian gods, especially Amun, the king of gods. They wrote in Egyptian hieroglyphs. They built temples in Egyptian style. They mummified their dead and believed in the Egyptian afterlife. In many ways, the Kushites became more Egyptian than the Egyptians themselves, preserving traditions even as Egypt's own culture evolved and changed. And then came the moment that changed everything. The moment when the student became the master. The moment when Kush didn't just rival Egypt but conquered it entirely. Around 750 years before the Common Era, Egypt was in chaos. The kingdom had fractured into competing territories, each controlled by local rulers fighting for power. The great age of pyramid builders was long gone. Egypt, the once mighty civilization, was tearing itself apart from within. From the south, Kushite kings watched this chaos with growing concern. They saw themselves as the true protectors of Egyptian religion and culture. So they marched north, not as conquerors seeking to destroy, but as liberators seeking to restore order. And they succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. The Kushite conquest of Egypt established what historians call the 25th dynasty. For nearly a century, black African kings sat on the throne of Egypt, ruling as pharaohs over one of the world's greatest civilizations. This wasn't a puppet government or a temporary occupation. These were legitimate pharaohs who controlled both kingdoms, calling themselves kings of Kush and Egypt, lords of the two lands. 5 Kushite pharaohs ruled during this golden age, each one leaving their mark on history. They didn't try to change Egypt. Instead, they revived it. They restored old temples that had fallen into ruin. They brought back ancient religious practices that had been forgotten. They commissioned new monuments and artwork. They saw themselves as the defenders of true Egyptian tradition, and in many ways, they were right. These weren't just ceremonial rulers sitting in palaces. These were warrior kings who led armies into battle. When the Assyrian Empire, the superpower of the ancient Near East, invaded Egypt with their iron weapons and cavalry, it was the Kushite pharaohs who organized the resistance. They fought battle after battle, defending Egypt against an enemy that had conquered everyone else in their path. One Kushite pharaoh launched military campaigns into the Levant, trying to protect Egyptian interests abroad. Another focused on massive building projects, constructing temples and monuments that still stand today. They all shared one thing: an absolute devotion to Egyptian religion, especially the worship of Amun. They built more temples to Amun than many native Egyptian dynasties, pouring resources into religious sites both in Egypt and in their Kushite homeland. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The Kushites didn't abandon their own culture. They created a unique fusion, blending Egyptian traditions with their own. In art from this period, The pharaohs are shown with distinctly African features: broad noses, full lips, dark skin rendered in black stone. This wasn't an attempt to look Egyptian. This was a proud declaration of their identity. The pyramid-building tradition illustrates this perfectly. While the Kushites built pyramids like the Egyptians, they made them their own. Steeper angles, different proportions, unique burial chambers. They took an Egyptian concept and evolved it into something distinctly Kushite. Over their history, Kushite rulers built more pyramids than all the Egyptian dynasties combined in the previous 1,000 years. Women held unprecedented power in Kushite society, another difference from Egypt. The queen mothers, called Kandakes, wielded real political authority. Some even ruled as independent monarchs, leading armies and making state decisions. Later, Greek and Roman writers expressed shock at the idea of warrior queens from Kush. But for the Kushites, this was normal. The 25th dynasty represented something extraordinary, a moment when Africa ruled the ancient world's most prestigious kingdom, a time when black pharaohs sat on thrones that had been occupied by legendary rulers for thousands of years. They proved that race had nothing to do with capability, with civilization, with power. But this golden age couldn't last forever. The Assyrians kept coming back, wave after wave, their iron weapons cutting through Egyptian defenses. Eventually, the Kushite pharaohs made a strategic decision. Rather than see Egypt destroyed, they withdrew back to their homeland, back to Kush, letting the Assyrians claim their prize. But the story didn't end there. Not by a long shot. When the Kushites left Egypt and returned south, they took their culture, their traditions, and their power with them. The Kingdom of Kush continued to thrive for another 1,000 years, but in Egypt, something else began to happen. Something deliberate, something calculated. The new rulers started erasing Kushite history. Names were chiseled off monuments, statues were destroyed or buried, inscriptions were defaced. Later Egyptian dynasties wanted to forget that black African kings had once ruled their kingdom. They wanted to erase the memory of the 25th dynasty as if it had never happened. In the grand narrative of Egyptian history, the Kushite pharaohs became an embarrassing footnote, a period of foreign domination to be forgotten as quickly as possible. Then came the Greeks. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, Greek historians began writing about Egyptian history. But they had their own biases, their own prejudices. They rarely mentioned the Kushites, and when they did, it was often with a dismissive tone. The Romans came next, and while they acknowledged Kush existed, they painted it as a barbaric kingdom on the edge of the civilized world, not as the sophisticated civilization it actually was. But the real erasure came much later. When European archaeologists arrived in Egypt during the 19th century, they came with preconceived notions. They'd been taught that civilization meant white civilization, that great achievements in architecture, art, and culture could only come from European or Near Eastern peoples, not from sub-Saharan Africans. So, when evidence of the Kushite pharaohs appeared, many early archaeologists struggled with it. Some suggested the Kushites must have had Egyptian or Middle Eastern ancestry. Others downplayed their achievements, arguing they merely copied Egyptian culture without contributing anything original. Some simply ignored the evidence altogether, focusing their excavations and publications on other periods of Egyptian history. The pyramids of Sudan went largely unexplored. While thousands of tourists visited Egypt's pyramids every year, the Kushite pyramids sat forgotten in the desert. No grand expeditions, no major funding, no headlines in newspapers back in Europe and America. It wasn't that the evidence didn't exist. It was that the narrative didn't fit the story. people wanted to tell about the ancient world. This continued well into the 20th century. Textbooks mentioned ancient Egypt extensively, but barely acknowledged Kush. If the Kingdom of Kush appeared at all, it was usually as a footnote, a conquered territory of Egypt, not as an independent civilization that had conquered Egypt. School children around the world learned about Egyptian pharaohs, but never heard about the Black Pharaohs who ruled the same kingdom. Museums displayed Egyptian artifacts prominently, but kept Kushite artifacts in storage or in less visible galleries. The narrative became fixed. Egypt equaled pyramids, pharaohs, and ancient glory. Sudan equaled, well, nothing that most people knew about. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This erasure wasn't accidental. It was convenient. During the colonial era, European powers were carving up Africa, claiming the continent needed European civilization. The idea that sophisticated African civilizations had built pyramids, ruled empires, and created advanced technologies didn't fit that narrative. So that story got buried, literally and figuratively. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't stay buried forever. In recent decades, archaeologists have returned to Sudan with better technology, better funding, and most importantly, better attitudes. And what they're finding is undeniable. The pyramid fields at Meroe are staggering. Over 200 pyramids clustered together, many still standing despite being more than 2,000 years old. These aren't ruins that need imagination to appreciate. These are real pyramids, smaller than Egypt's giants but impressive in their own right, rising 30 meters into the air with precisely cut stone blocks. Inside these pyramids, archaeologists have found treasures that prove the wealth and sophistication of Kushite civilization. Gold jewelry of exquisite craftsmanship, bronze vessels with intricate decorations, pottery showing artistic styles unique to Kush, stone carvings depicting the deceased in royal regalia. These weren't primitive people making crude copies of Egyptian art. These were master craftsmen creating their own aesthetic tradition. The royal tombs revealed something else that modern science can't ignore. Mummies. The Kushites mummified their dead just like the Egyptians, but analysis of these remains tells a clear story. These were African people. DNA analysis, skeletal features, everything points to sub-Saharan African ancestry. The Black Pharaohs weren't a myth or an exaggeration. They were real people who looked like Africans because they were Africans. Recent excavations have uncovered entire temple complexes dedicated to Amun. These aren't small shrines. These are massive structures with columns, courtyards, and sacred chambers. The level of architectural sophistication rivals anything built in Egypt during the same period. The religious devotion shows in every carved hieroglyph, every offering table, every sacred inscription. But perhaps the most exciting discoveries are still coming. Satellite imagery has revealed hundreds of structures still buried beneath the sand. Archaeologists estimate that less than 1% of Kushite sites have been properly excavated. Entire cities remain underground, waiting for someone to dig them up. Palaces, temples, houses, workshops, all frozen in time beneath centuries of accumulated sand. Modern technology is revealing secrets that early archaeologists missed or ignored. Ground-penetrating radar shows building foundations. Magnetometry maps out ancient street plans. Aerial photography highlights patterns invisible from the ground. Each new technology brings new discoveries, new proof of Kushite sophistication. The iron smelting sites at Meroe tell their own story. These weren't small forges making a few tools. These were industrial operations producing iron on a massive scale. Slag heaps, the waste from iron production, still tower over the landscape. Chemical analysis of this slag proves the Kushites had mastered high-temperature furnace technology. They were metalworking experts operating at a level that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. The Meroitic script, Kush's own written language, appears on monuments throughout their territory. While scholars haven't fully deciphered it yet, they can read enough to know it's not Egyptian. The Kushites developed their own alphabet, their own language, proving they weren't just copying their northern neighbors, but innovating in their own right. Trade goods found in Kushite sites reveal connections spanning the ancient world. Roman glass, Indian spices, African ivory, Arabian incense. The Kushites sat at the center of trade networks reaching from the Mediterranean to Central Africa, from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. They weren't isolated or backward. They were connected and cosmopolitan. The more archaeologists dig, the more impressed they become. This wasn't just a kingdom that happened to build some pyramids. This was an advanced civilization with technology, culture, and social structures that were revolutionary for their time. The iron production alone deserves recognition. While the rest of Africa was still using bronze and stone, the Kushites were mass-producing iron weapons, tools, and goods. This gave them military superiority and economic advantages that funded their empire. The technical knowledge required to build furnaces hot enough to smelt iron, to process ore efficiently, to create quality metal consistently, all of this shows a level of scientific understanding that was cutting-edge for the ancient world. Their architecture evolved beyond copying Egyptian models. Kushite temples incorporated unique design elements. Their palaces featured innovations in water management, with sophisticated systems for collecting and storing water in the desert environment. Their cities were planned with straight streets, residential districts, and public spaces that show urban planning expertise. The art created by Kushite craftsmen shows a distinct aesthetic. While they used Egyptian techniques, the style was their own. Jewelry combined gold, precious stones, and glass in ways that were uniquely Kushite. Pottery featured shapes and decorations not found in Egyptian work. Sculpture depicted people with realistic African features, no attempt to conform to Egyptian artistic conventions. But perhaps most remarkable was the role of women. The Kandakes, the queen mothers, held real power in ways almost unheard of in the ancient world. Some ruled as sole monarchs after their husbands died. Others commanded armies, leading troops into battle against foreign invaders. Roman historians wrote with amazement and sometimes fear about these warrior queens. One Kandake even fought against the Roman Empire itself when they tried to expand into Kushite territory, and she won, forcing the Romans to negotiate a peace treaty. This gender equality extended beyond royalty. Evidence suggests women in Kushite society enjoyed more rights and respect than in many neighboring civilizations. They owned property, ran businesses, and participated in religious ceremonies. The society that built these pyramids valued women's contributions in ways that were progressive even by modern standards. The religious life of Kush blended Egyptian beliefs with indigenous African traditions. While they worshipped Amun as their chief god, they also honored local deities. Their funeral practices, while similar to Egyptian mummification, included unique Kushite elements. The journey to the afterlife in Kushite belief included aspects not found in Egyptian theology. Trade made the Kushites wealthy, but it also made them culturally sophisticated. They were exposed to Greek philosophy, Roman engineering, Persian art, and African traditions from kingdoms to their south. Rather than being isolated, they synthesized influences from across the known world while maintaining their distinct identity. The Kingdom of Kush lasted until around 350 of the Common Era. a lifespan longer than most empires in human history. When it finally fell, it wasn't to foreign conquest, but to environmental and economic changes. The trade routes shifted, resources depleted, and the kingdom gradually fragmented. But its legacy lived on in the kingdoms that came after, in the cultural traditions that survived, and in the monuments that still stand today. So why does all this matter? Why should we care about a forgotten African kingdom and its buried pyramids? Because history isn't just about the past. It's about how we understand ourselves and our world today. For centuries, the story of human civilization has been told as if advanced culture only developed in Europe and the Middle East, as if Africa south of the Sahara contributed nothing to human progress, as if black Africans never built great civilizations, never ruled empires, never achieved anything worth remembering. The Kingdom of Kush and its black pharaohs prove that story is a lie. Here was an African civilization that built more pyramids than Egypt, that ruled the ancient world's most prestigious kingdom, that mastered iron technology before most of Europe, that created art, architecture, and culture that influenced the ancient world, that empowered women in ways that were revolutionary, that lasted for over 3,000 years. This wasn't a primitive society or a minor footnote. This was a superpower, and it's been deliberately left out of the history we're taught. Not because the evidence doesn't exist, but because that evidence didn't fit the narrative that powerful people wanted to tell about Africa and Africans. The good news is that truth is finally emerging. Archaeologists are excavating these sites with respect and proper funding. Museums are starting to display Kushite artifacts prominently. Documentaries and books are telling this story to wider audiences. Sudan is working to protect and promote its ancient heritage. The pyramids of Meroe are now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, finally getting the recognition they deserve. But hundreds of sites remain unexplored. Entire cities still lie beneath the sand. Thousands of artifacts wait in storage, never studied or displayed. The Meroitic script remains mostly undeciphered, meaning we can't read most of what the Kushites wrote about themselves. There's so much more to discover, so many more secrets waiting to be revealed. This isn't just important for African history, it's important for human history. The Kushites were part of the interconnected ancient world, trading with Rome, fighting the Assyrians, influencing cultures across Africa and beyond. Their story is everyone's story, part of the shared human journey toward civilization, culture, and progress. The Black Pharaohs ruled for a reason. They were capable, powerful, and sophisticated. They preserved Egyptian culture when Egypt itself was falling apart. They built monuments that still stand after thousands of years. They created a civilization that deserves to be remembered alongside ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. And now you know their story. The story they don't teach in schools. The civilization they left out of textbooks. The truth about who really built those pyramids standing in the Sudanese desert. This is just the beginning. There are hundreds more pyramids still buried under the sand, waiting to be excavated. Entire cities yet to be uncovered. If this story amazed you, imagine what else has been hidden from history books. Smash that like button if you want more untold history like this. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss when we expose another buried truth. Drop a comment below. What lost civilization should we investigate next? And share this video. This is a story that needs to be told. The Black Pharaohs ruled for a reason, and now you know why. The truth has been buried long enough. It's time to bring it into the light.